Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for this evening. We thank you so much for your word, because your word is life to those that find it and health to all their flesh. God, we're going to find it tonight, and it's going to change our world in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thanks again for being here. Believe it or not, this is week 7 of this 8-week semester. I can't not believe it. Next week is our last week for this semester, which means it'll be our last leadership class next week, and Nina's class also will wrap up next week. But we've got an amazing next semester ready for you, and I'll tell you what that is as we close tonight. I want to talk to you about something that I think applies to all of us, and from a leadership standpoint, it's important that we understand how to deal with these situations in our lives so that we are effective. Effective in our own lives, but effective in helping other people navigate the waters that we find ourselves in on a frequent basis. But to start off with, I want to talk about some change that we've seen in our lives. And not huge, this isn't a big deal, but we've all experienced some change around us. Most of you are younger than I am, so some of you won't remember a couple of these, but I've got 4 different things that have changed dramatically in recent time. Number 1 is bookstores. I remember in the old days going to bookstores and you looked at books. Anybody else remember that? When you walk into a bookstore today, what's the first thing you see? You see the electronic reading device displayed, don't you? I mean, at Barnes & Noble, it's Nook, it could be a Kindle, could be one of those things. But isn't it crazy? You walk into a bookstore and that's what you see. I went into a bookstore in Oklahoma City, and right in the middle of the store, you walk down the center aisle, there were these big walls all the way around that completely blocked you from getting to the back of the store, and that's what it was. It is an area for their digital reading device. And I thought, isn't that crazy? This is a bookstore. That's prime real estate. You would think that's where all the books they wanted to sell would be, because you have to walk past there or down that aisle to get to the rest of the books. But instead, you can't get through. You have to walk off the aisle, go in the entrance to this area, and then they've captured you. But why in the world would someone come up with a marketing strategy for a bookstore, a business that sells books, to market an electronic reading device? It seemed like a crazy concept to me. But we'll answer that here in a second, but that's just one of the changes. Another of the changes is fast food. Now, this may shock some of you, but when I grew up, there was no fast food. We ate at home, and we ate what we prepared at home. It was amazing. My mom worked. We were not wealthy at all, and so my mom worked full-time the entire time I was growing up, but we always had home-cooked meals. She did not always fix it. Sometimes my dad did, sometimes we kids did, but we always fixed it at home. I remember a fast food restaurant opened in our town, a small town, and it was called Master Chef, a hamburger place where you drove in. Now, you couldn't go through a drive-through window, but you walked in, you ordered your food, came out real fast, and you left. And I remember my dad took me down there, because my dad was kind of a grill-out hamburger connoisseur, master chef himself. But anyway, he said, let's go check this restaurant out. I was young. So we went down to this place, and he hated it. And I'll tell you why he hated it, because it was fast. It was different. It wasn't that it wasn't good, it was that it was different. And then I remember Kentucky Fried Chicken went in, and then Master Chef became Burger Chef. And then, of course, McDonald's and all these other restaurants came in. But isn't it amazing today how we rely on fast food to eat? How many of you have eaten a fast food meal in the last week? Yeah, amazing. That's a lot fewer if I'd ask how many of us have not. Listen to this. There are roughly 160,000 fast food restaurants in America, and every day that number multiplies. 160,000. 50 million Americans eat a fast food meal at least once a day. Now that's how many in a day, that's how many eat one at least once a day, which is pretty phenomenal. It's a $65 billion industry, and we eat there not because the food is good, but we eat there because it's what? Fast. Yeah. More sugar, more starch, more sodium, more calories, less vitamins, less benefit, but it's what? Fast, right? So we go there. Trust me, we do not sit in our car and listen to, yeah, I'd like a hamburger, and you drive around and you don't know what you got. We don't do that because the food's phenomenal. We do that because it's fast, right? And so that has changed dramatically in our lifetime. What about gas stations? I was asking Caitlin and Harold this afternoon, I said, do you ever remember going to get gas at a place that was just a gas station or a filling station? In other words, it wasn't a store, and they can't remember ever doing that. I mean, Circle K was Harold's first experience, and I said, that is a store with pumps there. I mean, there used to be, in the old days, there were gas stations where you pulled in and got gas, and you left. You may even get your tires changed. You may get wipers put on your car, all that. But all you did is get gas. And my dad worked for a very small oil company in southern Indiana, and he used to travel to their stations. And back then there were gas wars, and we would go with him late at night, and we would scope out all the other gas stations to see what their prices were, and then he would lower his prices to be 1 or 2 cents less, which 1 or 2 cents then was 10% of the cost of a gallon of gas. And they'd even give gifts away. Like at this time of year, you might go in and get 10 gallons of gas and leave with a fruit basket. You remember that? I mean, it was awesome. We had fruit, well, never mind, but it was a lot different back then. Now where we go to get gas is nothing more than a grocery store with pumps outside. You know, I mean, we get our gas, I get my coffee. Way too often I get a pastry. Sometimes I get Almond Joys, like I did on my way here tonight. But you can buy grocery items, you can buy frozen stuff. I mean, it's amazing. But you know, that's happened recently. That is not a phenomenon that has been around for a long time. That's brand new. Why did that happen? What is it about these quick shops with gas pumps? What need does that meet in our lives that caused them to be so popular? Convenience, you bet. It's fast, right? We pump our own gas, we don't wait on anybody, but we also pick up the milk and the bread and that kind of thing. It's funny, I remember my dad came home, I was in high school, and he'd been on a trip to check out some stations. And he came home and he was so surprised. He said, we all sat down for dinner. He said, you are not going to believe what they're asking us to do at our gas stations. And my mom said, what in the world are they at? Because, I mean, this is like an earth-shattering. What? He's so fired up about this. What are they going to ask you to do? He said, they're going to ask us to sell milk and bread at our gas stations. Milk and bread. That's how it started. Gas stations. Why milk and bread? It was convenient. Those are two things that everybody needs when they stop and get gas. We're out of milk or we're out of bread. That was back before we were gluten-free. So milk and bread. But look at it now. I mean, who would have thought that milk and bread was going to turn into what it turned into today? Pretty incredible change. The fourth thing is phone stores, or what we used to call telephone stores. My grandmother lived next door to Southwestern Bell in southwest Indiana, and she lived next door to the phone company. And I got to know the people in the phone company pretty well because we all had cord phones at home. You know, a lot of us, we had a cool one that hung on the wall, and it was in our kitchen. We only had one phone. We had a small house, and that one phone meant everybody used that phone. And I used to go and have to buy new phone cords about every 6 months. So I got to know the people in the phone store. The reason I got to do that so often is because I have an older sister who was basically a guy magnet. And so the way she talked on the phone was she would call, or they would call, and then she would walk out the kitchen door to our back porch and close the door so no one could hear her, she thought. When you have a little brother, you need to be very careful about how much room you leave in that door. But anyway, so every 6 months or so, she'd snap the cord. So I was the one who got to go down and buy new phone cords. And it's kind of funny because that's how we lived. There are no stores like that anymore. I mean, now you go to the cell phone store where you take a number and you wait an hour and a half, and then someone comes to help you. And I mean, it's amazing. But why did that happen? Why do we not have phones with cords on them any longer? Because of convenience. Now we all have cell phones, right? I mean, back then, in 1981, when I started my sales career, I traveled Oklahoma, and I would have to stop at payphones if I needed information from my company. Now, we had a warehouse, and I have a warehouse manager in Tulsa. But if I was in Oklahoma City, I couldn't call him. I had to call our home office, leave a message, and then when he called in to check for messages, he would pick up the message. He couldn't call me because I was in a route and I wasn't at a phone. So he would leave them the answer, and then I would call them later in the day and get the answer to my question. I mean, that's not very convenient, is it? Especially when it's pouring down rain like this. You're hanging out trying to talk on a payphone. But what changed all that was convenience, right? We live in a world that's going through a metamorphosis to meet our needs and to make life convenient. But one of the interesting things today is those items of convenience have not given us any more free time, have they? They've not given us more time to relax. They've not given us more time just to hang out. They haven't given us more time to spend with our family. They've given us more time to be busy. So in other words, we go through fast food not because it's fast so we can go relax somewhere. We go to get fast food because it's fast because we've got someplace else to be, don't we? The cell phone. My goodness, talk about an item of convenience, but it has not caused us to have less busy time and more free time. It's the opposite. It has tied us more closely to other people, and so now we're busier than we've ever been using the items of convenience. I mean, isn't it crazy? I mean, they do make our lives easier, but they don't make it less hectic. And a lot of times they make it more hectic. I mean, it's kind of crazy. So if you would, very quickly, take your cell phone out. This is the only time in Second Mile you'll ever be asked to pull your phone out. Okay, I want you to check and see how many text messages you've received or sent in the last 2 days. I know, that's eternity, isn't it? It's going to be thousands. Huh? Well, you'd have to go through and count them. You're not going to do that, right? Okay, I didn't think so. Those of you who don't have any friends, you can count yours. The rest of you don't count. How many of you know that it's more than 10 in the last 2 days? How many of you know it's more than 20 in the last 2 days? How many of you know it's more than 30 in the last 2 days? How many of you could be 30 just today? Yeah, that's my point. See, it's so convenient, but you know what? How many of those texts, seriously, could have waited a couple hours? Most of mine could. I mean, it's crazy. I am like so far from being a techno geek, it's not funny. Vanessa and I generally have to ask the kids how we do anything on our phones, but I'm texting all the time. But it's stuff like, hey, how'd your lunch go? What'd you have? To one of my kids. Now, how important is that? I mean, you know, but that's how connected we are, isn't it? How many phone calls did you make or receive in the last 2 days? Again, you don't have to count. It's just an exercise. I did this with the church staff, though, at one time and asked them to count, and it was phenomenal. Some of them were using both hands and both feet and just to add them all up. How many of you, it's more than 10 calls in 2 days? Well, sure. I mean, we are so connected, aren't we? Here's a couple of statistics. And all I did was go out on the internet, which is another thing we're going to talk about. Text messaging users send or receive an average of 41.5 messages per day. The median user sends or receives 10 a day. If the median is 10 and the average is 41, what does that tell you about some people? Hundreds, right? It'd have to be to make the median that much higher. Listen to this. Those aged 18 to 29, how many of you in here are between 18 and 29? Yeah, a couple of you are liars, I can tell. Okay, listen to this. In your age group, 18 to 29, send and receive an average of 87.7 text messages a day. Is that amazing? The median user sends or receives 40 a day. That's 1,200 a month. That's the median. The 18 to 24 age group sends or receives an average of 109.5 text messages a day. That's 3,200 text messages a month. I honestly don't know what could be that important, but I guess when you're 22 years old, everything's important. The average person makes or receives 8 mobile phone calls a day, which is 250 calls a month, or 3,000 calls a year. Now, how many of you are on the internet? How many hours do you think you spend on the internet? Now, a lot of us do for work, don't we? I mean, I'm required to do reporting that requires me to go out onto the internet and I have to use technology. And I'm not saying technology is bad at all. It's great. But this is how it impacts our lives. The average American over the age of 2, let's talk about television first. How much television do you think you watch in a week? The average American over the age of 2 spends more than 34 hours a week watching television, plus 6 hours watching recorded programs. That's a 40-hour work week spent watching TV, and that's the average. That's not the high. I mean, seriously, you would think that the TV companies would pay our health benefits and stuff, wouldn't you? Give us a 401k. It's a 40-hour work week for us. Now, if you factor out people who leave their TVs on all night, it still comes out to 28 hours a week. So, I mean, that's a lot, isn't it? And that's not bad. Now, think about the internet. Think about the emails we send and receive. I mean, this is the shopping time of year. I saw a deal on the news this week where in-store shopping is down. It's at the lowest it's been in a long time. Online shopping is off the charts, which means people aren't fighting the traffic. They're shopping online. So, I mean, technology does have a lot of really, really good benefits. But the bottom line is it affects our lives, and all of these things that we deal with don't give us more free time or more relaxation because we're busy doing them now. And so I want to talk about that because the point tonight is, as leaders, how do we lead in an environment that is so distracting? When there's so much pulling for our attention, so much vying for our attention, how do we accomplish what we're supposed to accomplish for the Lord? How do we deal with all of that? Because it's a big deal. We have to know how to deal with it as leaders, but we also need to know how to coach our team members to accomplish what God wants them to accomplish when all of this stuff is drawing on their attention. Because it's very, very difficult, but it's very important. And so how do we accomplish what God wants us to accomplish in the midst of all the distractions? And so if you would turn to Luke chapter 8. I'm going to share a story in the Bible where the characters had to deal with cell phones and the internet and fast food. They didn't really. But they did have to deal with major, big-time distractions. And so I want to share the story with you. It's Luke chapter 8, and I'm going to begin in verse 41. And behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and begged him to come to his house. For he had an only daughter about 12 years of age, and she was dying. But as he went, the multitudes thronged him. Now a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, who had spent all of her livelihood on physicians, could not be healed by any, came from behind and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her flow of blood stopped. Now let's stop there for just a second. Let's summarize what's happened. Jairus, who was a ruler in a synagogue, needed Jesus' help. And so his daughter was very sick, so he went and he got Jesus. Jesus said, yeah, I'll come help. So on their way, they're thronged with all these people, and in the midst of that, a woman with an issue of blood came up and touched the hem of his garment, and the flow of blood stopped. Okay? That's a mouthful right there, but let's go on. Verse 45. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied it, Peter and those with him said, Master, the multitudes throng and press you, and you say, who touched me? But Jesus said, somebody touched me, for I perceived power going out from me. Now when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling. And falling down before him, she declared to him in the presence of all the people the reason she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. And he said to her, Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. So after she touched him and was healed, Jesus stops, asks who it was. She admits it was her, and then in front of everybody, she told the story of what happened, and he just said, be of good cheer, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Okay, let's look at the next part of the story. In verse 49, while he was still speaking, in other words, while he was still telling her, you're healed, go your way, someone came from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher. But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, do not be afraid, only believe, and she will be made well. So you can see now the next part of the story. While he stopped to address the woman with the issue of blood, news came from Jairus' house that the daughter died. But Jesus assured him it was going to be okay. Verse 51, and when he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now all wept and mourned for her, but he said, do not weep, for she's not dead, but sleeping. And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, little girl, arise. Then her spirit returned, and she arose immediately. And he commanded that she be given something to eat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. And this is an amazing, amazing story. Most people think, you hear the story about the woman with the issue of blood and how she was healed and how her faith made her whole. You can also hear about how Jairus' daughter was dead and Jesus raised her up. So the whole deal, this is not a story of a miracle. It's a story of several miracles in one day, in one short passage. Several miracles took place. And so I want to share with you how the three main characters of this story dealt with distraction. All three of them had things going on, pulling at them, trying to gather their attention. They all had reasons that none of this should have happened. It's kind of like us today with all the things pulling on us, all the things we have to deal with. It's like it's impossible for us to do what God wants us to do, yet we can do it. And that's what this story's about. This story's about three different individuals, three key individuals, and so many things went against them that it should never have happened, but it still did. And so I want to look at all three of them and how they dealt with the distractions. Let's start number one with Jairus. And on your notes, you've got some blanks there. And I want to talk about how Jairus, what he did to block out all the stuff that was going to cause it to not happen, and he pressed through and it happened in his life. Because there's several things that we can learn about leadership. Number one, Jairus, now don't write this down yet. I'm going to give you, Jairus, who was he? He was the ruler of the synagogue, right? How did the people, the rulers of the synagogue, feel about Jesus? You want to take a guess? They hated him, right? Jesus came to destroy what? Religion, the traditions of religion. Most of his really, really stressful encounters with people were in the synagogue or in the temple. And so there's no relationship here. Jairus should not associate with Jesus. And so let's look at number one. He left all the traditions that he'd clung to for his entire life and turned to Jesus. To become a ruler of the synagogue, he had to master all of the Jewish traditions. He had to practice all of the traditions. They were ingrained in him. They were a part of the fabric of his life. His daughter is dying, and he had to leave those traditions. He had to forget everything that he'd been programmed to believe and turn to Jesus for help. Number two, he risked losing everything by going to Jesus. How did he risk everything? Because he risked his position as a ruler of the synagogue by going and associating with Jesus. Simply by going to get Jesus' help, he was putting not only his reputation and his position in danger, he probably was putting his life and his life of his family in danger. And so everything that he had gained through all of his efforts in his own life, all the years and all the tradition, he had to risk losing all of it to go to Jesus. Number three, when he got to Jesus, he simply told him what he needed. He simply told Jesus what he needed. Now, isn't it amazing that he could not take care of his daughter on his own? None of the Jewish leaders could take care of her. None of the traditions could help her. And so he simply asked Jesus. He put his trust in Jesus. Something he'd heard, someone he spoke to, something he saw, maybe it was Jesus' reputation. Something occurred that caused him to believe, you can help her. And so he simply told Jesus what he needed. And Jesus never says no. The next point is, after Jesus said he'd go with him, he had to endure the painfully slow progress from that point to his house. Remember the story? Told us the multitude was there and the going was slow. They were holding everything up. Not only that, on that same line, Jesus stopped because the woman with the issue of blood touched the hem of his garment. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was Jairus, I'd be going crazy. If my daughter was sick unto death and I risked everything to get Jesus to come help me and he agreed to do it, I want him at my house now. But he couldn't even get to my house because there were so many people crowding him and slowing him down and holding him up. And then this crazy woman jumps out and stops everything. I'd be going, Jesus, come on, let's go. She's dying. I need help. And so the woman jumped out and was healed. And then the worst thing that could possibly happen, he got news that she died. But Jesus told him she'd be okay, and he believed Jesus. So the worst possible news he could have gotten, he received, but he trusted Jesus. He could have given up, he could have stopped, but Jesus said, no, she's going to be okay. And he believed him. And so the principles there are, that's how we should act every day. All the old traditions, all the old reasons we had to live like the world, all the old pressures we used to have, all the reasons that all the things around us pour on us to get us to stop, to not believe God, to think the miracles that we're seeking aren't going to happen, we have to press through. We can't allow those to gang up and cause us to not believe. Even when the worst news came, he still trusted Jesus. And he received his miracle. He blocked out all the traditions. He risked everything to get to Jesus. And that reminds me of a guy I was ministering to at church. And he was in tears, and he just said, Scott, I am at the bottom. There is no lower than where I am in my life right now. I can't even see the bottom from where I am. All I can do is trust God. And I'm telling you, something rose up in the side of me and convicted me that I want to be like him. And I told him, I said, you know what? You're right where the miracle is going to happen because you're trusting God. And I told him, I said, I'm convicted because, quite honestly, I think I'm still relying on my own abilities a lot. Because I'm not to the point in my life with most of my part of my life where I only trust God. And that's where we need to be. We've got to trust Him. We've got to cling to Him above everything else. Nothing else really is the solution but Him. And that's where Jairus was. None of the other things about him could help. He had to trust God. And so as leaders, that's where we need to be. We need to trust Him first. Our abilities are great. All the things around us are great. But we've got to trust God. That's what changes everything. That's the game changer. And so that's how Jairus dealt with all the distractions. Now let's look at how the woman with the issue of blood dealt with all the distractions. Here was a woman who was sick for 12 years. Not only was she sick, but she was unclean. She had an issue of blood. So she was an outcast from society. She was not allowed to go where everybody went. She was not allowed to be where everybody was. And she was an outcast. Not only that, she spent everything she had to get well and didn't get better. So can you imagine her life? She's not a part of society. She's flat broke. She's sick. I mean, emotionally, she'd have to be a wreck. She has no relationships. And so she's about at the bottom, isn't she? It's not good. So look at what she did. She decided, I'm going to go to this Jesus, and I'm just going to touch the hem of His garment. She said, if I touch the hem of His garment, what? I'll be well. I'll be healed. And so she had to go and find Jesus. She found Him. But guess what? He's not alone. He's being thronged by people that she's not allowed to associate with. So she's got to get through them as an unclean member of the nation. She's got to get her way through them to where she can touch the hem of His garment. So she, like Jairus, had to give it all up. This is her shot, and she's going to take it. So she had to push her way through the people that shunned her just to get to Jesus and touch the hem of His garment. And it's amazing because she did it. And when she touched the hem of His garment, she was healed. He did not turn and heal her. He didn't lay hands on her. He didn't speak to the disease. Her faith made her whole, which is pretty amazing. For an outcast, someone who was shunned, somebody who had nothing, her faith made her whole. And so I want to look at how she handled the distractions and what she had to overcome in order to have her miracle. Number one, she kept her eyes on Jesus. She could easily have looked at her circumstances. She could easily have looked at her position in society. She could easily, she had to be so disheartened when she finally saw Jesus and recognized she probably couldn't get to Him. There's too many people. They weren't going to let her get to Him. But she kept her eyes on Him. Number two, she refused to allow the circumstances in her life to prevent her from receiving what she needed. She refused to allow all the circumstances, and there were lots of them, to prevent her from receiving what she needed. Number three, she believed that if she could get to Jesus, her future would be different than her past. She believed, she actually said, if I can touch the hem of His garment, I'll be healed. She recognized that her future could be good in spite of what the past was like. The fourth thing is, she fought through the horrible image that others had projected on her and fought her way through them to get to Jesus. And finally, her faith brought the manifestation of her dream. And I love how Jesus in the midst of all this, turned to her, which he didn't need to do because he already perceived she was healed. But he turned to her anyway. The whole throng of people is all around, and I love this, and I believe that God will do this for you. All those people who said she was nothing, who said she was unclean, who said she was an outcast, all the people who had taken her money to make her better and she wasn't, all of that crowd, listen to this, in front of all of them, Jesus gave her the opportunity to give her testimony. He didn't have to. She was healed. But I believe he did this for her. He gave her the opportunity in front of everybody to tell what had happened. How amazing is that? And I believe for you, some of you have been wrestling things. You've been piled on by people, by circumstances. If you'll stay faithful, I believe God will give you the opportunity and open up the door for you to testify of the miracle in front of all of them, which I think is a pretty doggone good day. So anyway, he didn't have to do it, but he did, and he did it for her. Now, poor Jairus is going nuts at the time, I'm sure, because all this has taken time. And number 3, let's look at how Jesus dealt with the distractions. Here Jesus is going along, ministering, talking, teaching, and a ruler of the synagogue, again, they hate him, comes to him for help. But Jesus did not say no. He said yes. So Jesus goes with him. And we know the story, how he's thronged, he's pressed from all sides, and we know the woman with the issue of blood stops and touches him, and he stops and ministers to her in the midst of everything. And so I just love this. Number 1 for Jesus is, even though the throng was great and the going was slow, he did not send anyone away. Even though it was impeding his purpose. His purpose for this trip was what? To heal Jairus' daughter. They were slowing him down. They were making the going rough. He never sent any of them away. Number 2, though his purpose for the trip was to heal Jairus' daughter, he was willing to take time to minister to someone else. And I love this because miracles don't just happen at our destination. They also happen along the journey. And I think sometimes we're pressing so hard, we're so intent on when I get there, this miracle is going to happen. When I have the money, when it comes in, these miracles are going to take place. When my family member calls me and wants to reconcile, the miracle is going to happen. We're always looking for the destination. At that destination, something good's going to happen. And we miss the opportunities for great things to happen along the way. The ministry opportunities along the way. And I love that Jesus didn't miss that. He knew he was supposed to go heal Jairus' daughter, but he still took time to minister along the way. The next point is, when the terrible news came from Jairus' house, he assured Jairus that his purpose would be fulfilled and his daughter would be healed. But not only that, he asked Jairus to remain in a place of faith. Jesus knew it was going to happen, and he communicated to Jairus, stay strong, don't give up, don't give in. This news does not change anything. She's going to be fine. And that's what got Jairus to where he could receive. He did not let bad news prevent him from accomplishing his purpose. And I want to encourage all of you the same thing. When you're pursuing your purpose, do not let discouraging news rob you of that dream. Don't let it stop you from fulfilling your purpose. And he didn't take the throng of people to the house. Now listen to this. He did not turn any of them away on the way, did he? But when he got to Jairus' house, he only let a couple of people go with him into the house. He did not let the throngs go in the house. Not only that, the people who were ridiculing him, he made them leave. And I liken this to, in our lives, what he simply did was he hit the mute button. He hit the mute button so all the negativity, all the doubt, all the fear, all the unbelief, all the ridicule, all the noise going on around him, he shut it off. It's business time. It's go time. He turned it off. He took a couple of his closest companions and Jairus, and they went in and they raised his daughter up. And so I want to encourage you, in this crazy age we live in, and I'm telling you, it's wild. There's so much going on all around us. In this crazy time, don't be afraid to hit the mute button. Don't be afraid to put your cell phone on silent and set it aside and get in the Word. Don't be afraid to turn the television off and study the Word. Don't be afraid to turn all the distractions off when you know God's got a purpose for you. It's all around us, but we're in control. That's what prosperity is in our lives. It's control. So let's be the people that know what to do. We're going to press through. We're going to trust Jesus. We're not going to allow the distractions to get us off course. We're going to stay the course, and we're going to see God's purpose fulfilled in our lives. Amen?